Hey, welcome to Bible study. Bible study today is happening on a Monday night, and I'm here in the fireside room all by myself, which is 1, sad, 2, lonely, and 3, a little bit creepy. So I try to get done quickly before it gets too dark outside because I always get scared in the building alone. It's just me and the mice, the church mice tonight. So I'm glad that you've come to join. I'm going to imagine that you are all here with me and we are sharing this study together. Going to encourage you, if you haven't read the chapters, you could pause right now and read chapter 22 of Luke, and that would be awesome, or whatever. And then I'm always trying to remind people, think of somebody that you would have seen at the Bible study that sits behind you or in front of you or next to you or across from you, or someone that you're thinking about, and make sure you let them know that they came to mind today. Send them a little note via text, email, blah, 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 and just say, hey, I thought of you. And if you have it in you, say a prayer for them. I want to thank you that have sent me some sightings. I'm going to quick give you my sightings plea. Just let me know that you're out there. Let me know that you're listening. I love getting a little text message or some kind of email to say, hey, I'm here. Thanks for hanging in there too last week when the video was really, really long. So another part of adjusting to video teaching is adjusting the time to just the time, because 1, it's difficult to upload if it's too long, and 2, I worry that you will stop paying attention. So I'm going to cruise and go quickly. And here's what I'm going to do this week. The chapters 22 and 23 of Luke tell the passion story of Jesus. They tell the last days of Jesus' life through his death and burial. And I want to make them fit with the week that we're in. So it's very rare that a Bible study will coincide with the events of will be planned well enough, at least to coincide with the events of a certain time during the church year. So I'm going to do 2 chapters this week in 2 separate videos, and that way next week we'll get to cover the Easter or the resurrection text after we have celebrated Easter on our own. So look forward to that. You got 2 to watch this week. Woohoo! Let's pray and go for it. Thank you, Lord, for this time that each of us have taken to stop and to look into your word. There is so much in here, Jesus, that describes the last week of your life and the sacrifice that you made on our behalf. We are very familiar with this story, Lord, at least most of us are. And so I pray that you would give us new eyes to see you, new ears to hear what you have to say, and open and soft hearts to receive what you want to do in us and to transform us. So Lord, I pray for everybody who's watching. I pray for those who are lonely, that they will feel your companionship. I pray for those who are sick, that they will experience your healing. For those who are really struggling financially, that you will provide the means for them, that you will help us as a church community to know how to help and to reach out, to offer hope. We dive into your word, Jesus. Thank you for giving it to us. Thank you for giving your life for us. In your name we pray. Amen. So Luke chapter 22, here's the setting. The setting is basically Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and the stories in these 2 chapters kind of go in and out of that. It's just a few days after the triumphal entry, which was Palm Sunday, which we just celebrated, well, on my count, yesterday. If you're watching on a Tuesday, it was a couple days ago at any rate. And these are the things that happened during that week between Palm Sunday and Easter. We call this the Passion narrative. And so Luke 22 starts out with a little backstory of what's going on. And basically in Jerusalem, all of the highest level leaders of Jewish authority are together and they are plotting. They've been trying for so long to get Jesus, to get him stuck on something so that they can accuse him and really get rid of him. And the problem for at least a lot of chapters for this group of leaders are the people. There are crowds of people who are fascinated by Jesus, who are turning their lives to Jesus, who are following Jesus, who really like Jesus. And these leaders know that if they just try to grab him in public or they try to do something, the people will rise up. The people won't put up with it. So they're fearful of the people. So they're trying to figure out, how are we going to catch Jesus in some kind of way? And then lo and behold, in chapter 22, Judas shows up. One of the 12 of Jesus' closest friends shows up where they are to meet with them. Now I just picture what they're doing. They're all sitting around talking, and all of a sudden somebody goes, hey, there's somebody at the door. Well, go answer the door. Well, guess who it is? It's Judas. He's one of those guys with Jesus. Well, what does he want? I don't know. What should I do? Should I let him in? And the other one, yeah, but let's be careful. So Judas comes in, and it turns out and becomes very evident in just a few short words in Luke chapter 22 that Judas has switched sides. Luke uses the phrase, Satan entered him, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but overall, it means that cosmic forces are involved. This is not just a battle between human beings. It's not just the human Jesus versus these human other people. There is a spiritual battle that's commencing. And Judas shows up without any of his friends knowing about it. And he shows up to tell this group of leaders that he's ready and willing to betray Jesus. The big question about this is, what did it take? What did it take? Why does Judas do this? What makes him turn away and turn in this direction? I don't think it's about the money. They don't even offer the money or they say they'll give him money, but he doesn't ask for anything. I don't think it's about money. I think it might have to do with disappointment. Judas is seeing this movement happening, and Jesus isn't going anywhere in the direction that he's going. And in his disappointment and impatience, maybe he's seeking to get the ball rolling on his own. Maybe he can escalate this thing, and maybe Jesus then will become the military or strong leader that he wanted Jesus to be. I'm really not totally sure, but that's what happens. So here they are plotting against Jesus, and now the opportunity has come, the problem solved. They can't grab Jesus while he's in public because of the people, but this guy, one of Jesus' own, is going to lead them to a place where they can find Jesus in private. It's like all the spy movies and the spy TV shows that I watch. There's always a mole or a traitor, or there's always somebody working both angles, and this is Judas in this place. So as we move on, that's one place. Now, meanwhile, starting with verse 7, Jesus and his friends are together, and Judas will eventually rejoin them without anybody knowing, except for Jesus. And they're preparing for the Passover. And in this little section, it's clear that Jesus is directing all the events. It's just like before they entered Jerusalem on the triumphal entry text. It's Jesus directs all the things that are happening, and one gets the impression that nothing's going to happen that Jesus doesn't know about. He's not going to suddenly be surprised by something that happens in this week. He knows what's going on, and he is orchestrating the events that come. So Jesus and his followers, just the 12 closest friends, end up celebrating the Passover together in a private room in Jerusalem. This is a really familiar narrative to us. I mean, we tell this story in a little tiny way every time we have communion together. We'll tell it 2 times this week. We told it on Palm Sunday. It was a communion Sunday. On Monday, Thursday, we tell the story again of Jesus and his disciples. So again, whenever there's a really familiar story, I was trying to remind us, try to read this with different eyes. Try to see something you haven't seen before. Imagine what it's like the first people that hear about this story, or those that experience this, and they only experience it one time. So when Jesus and his guests, his friends, are together, Luke says that they are reclined at the table. And that was a situation where they didn't have chairs and sitting around a table. And it's not like the big famous painting of the Last Supper where they're all just lined up along the row. They are sitting at they're at a table, but they sit on the floor and they kind of lean on their side as they are at the table. They literally recline. And I vividly remember years and years ago, a speaker who I loved named Brennan Manning, and I remember him describing this scene and talking about them being so close that whoever sat next to Jesus could have laid their head on Jesus' chest, could have put their head right next to Jesus' heart as they sat there to have this dinner together. They are close. It's a very intimate gathering. And during this meal, this time, Jesus says a couple things. At one point he says, I eagerly desire it. With deep emotion, he really wants to spend this time with his disciples. He knows that every minute that he has with them is precious time. It's his farewell dinner. He also gives them an indication that he's not going to do this again. This is his literal last meal that he will have in his human form before he dies. He won't eat like this again until the kingdom is fulfilled. And while they eat together, he takes things that are already there to help them see an image of what he wants them to understand. He uses the phrase remember. And the word remember should have jumped into their memories just as every year at Passover, which is the meal they're celebrating. Every year you would remember the events that caused this Passover celebration. You would hear the same story over and over again. And it was the remembrance of when the people who were enslaved in Egypt were spared judgment and death and then delivered from slavery. And as Jesus is telling his disciples to remember the things that he says, they don't even know that they are just like those people that were enslaved, and that they too will be spared judgment and death and be delivered from slavery to sin as Jesus becomes both the sacrifice and as Jesus establishes a new covenant. So we are the beneficiaries of this same new covenant. We have been spared from death. We have been rescued from slavery to sin. We have been spared judgment because of what Jesus does. And he introduces it in this very simple and intimate meal. You might want to go back and read through Exodus if you want to understand this a little bit better. So he takes two items that are at the dinner table. He takes bread and he takes a cup of wine. And these things now take on new meaning as they become the memorial symbols of Jesus' death. The bread, the symbol of his body, and the wine, the symbol of his blood. Remember, he's talking to people at this point who don't know that he's going to be crucified tomorrow. Like, this is Thursday night of that week, and they don't know. So as you read this, it's that thing where it's so familiar and we just think, oh yeah, I know this one. But they are people that are still trying to comprehend what it is that he told them. And somebody, after the fact, must have come back and said, wait, Jesus told us to remember. Do you remember the bread? Do you remember the wine? Do you remember when he did that? And now it makes sense to me. So they're in the middle of this intimate, lovely meal. It's Jesus' last meal with them. And like in any family gathering that can be really precious and wonderful, sometimes it doesn't stay that way. So first, as they're having this nice time together, Jesus says, hey, by the way, one of you is going to betray me. And then they all start wondering, well, what? Whom? What are you talking about? And as they kind of mutter and mumble to each other really close together, you wonder if Jesus doesn't just look and give Judas an eye. Just look him straight in the eye, and you know that Jesus isn't going to be surprised by anything. He already knows what Judas has planned. And I always wonder, does Judas think twice at this point? Does he regret his decision? Does he want to change his mind? I don't know. So Jesus says that, and then the disciples start to argue about who's the greatest. Yep. Just like brothers, just like sisters, they're arguing about who should get the best place. Maybe they're spurred on by the idea of somebody in the group being a betrayer, and they're trying to one-up each other on how faithful they are. But it's not the first time that this has come up with them. So Jesus has some teaching to do. I'm sure he's thinking, oh my goodness, have you not been listening? Are you really having this argument? And he still has to keep teaching them the kingdom that he's been talking about, the kingdom that he brings to rule is different than what they know and what they've heard of. The way that they should behave or the way he wants them to live is different than anything they've seen. His expectations are different. The community that they are and will become is different. And he has to tell them the way that you understand power, the way kings lord it over people, it's not gotten the world into a good place. And he says to them in chapter 22, chapter 22, verse 26, you are not to be like that. There's a totally different way to rule. I've told you over and over and over, I didn't come to have power over people, but to come under and lift them up. And he said the way that you understand power is wrong. The way that the rest of the world, the way that these leaders, the way that Rome understands power, that isn't me. Here's my understanding, and here's how I would define power according to Jesus. Power means service. It means you serve other people. It means you tend to the needs of others. You bring relief where it's needed. It's like how young people then culturally would serve their elders, or like food staff people would serve their guests. John, when John tells this story in the Gospel of John, he has Jesus washing the disciples' feet here as a physical image of that same thing. So Jesus says, I'm among you, verse 27, as one who serves. And so he's telling them, you're going to need to do like me, do what I have been doing. Open the doors to the lepers, the littles, and the lost. And he commends them at one point. He says, you've been with me through thick and thin. You're going to have your place in the kingdom, but stop arguing, basically, about who's going to be the best. And then in the middle of this dinner, he gives a specific warning to Peter. I don't know if Peter was arguing about his own greatness, or if they were all saying to Peter, oh, Peter, you're probably the great one. You're probably going to have the best spot. But Jesus looks at him and says, Simon, remember his name was Simon, then Jesus started calling Peter. He says, it's going to get difficult for you, Simon. Satan has asked for you. I can't imagine hearing those words come from Jesus. And then Jesus says, but I have prayed for you. I have lifted your name before the Father, and you're going to make it. You are going to make it back. And your brothers, they're going to need you. So know that this is coming. It's going to be difficult. And you're going to turn, but you're going to come back. And Peter says, no way. I'll go anywhere you go, Jesus. I'll go with you to the death. And Jesus says, slow down. I'm going to tell you even more specifically what I mean. Before the rooster crows, today, you will deny me 3 times. And then one more thing he throws out to them at the dinner. It's going to get difficult. It's going to get difficult. Remember when I sent you out and I told you don't bring anything with you and you have to depend on other people to help you? Well, now that's going to change. They're not going to want to help you anymore. You're going to need to fend for yourselves and even for your lives. And he even says this weird phrase, even you're going to need a sword. And they tell him, we have 2 swords. Oh, okay, we have swords. And Jesus says that's enough. He's not telling them that they should all be armed, but he's giving them a warning that hostility awaits them. They move from that dinner and they head out to the Mount of Olives, verses 39 and following. And they're outside of Jerusalem, and it seems like, I believe Jesus goes there every night with them to pray. So this is similar. It's a similar thing that's been happening. And so nothing should seem out of the ordinary, except by the end of the night, everything will have changed. So when it's time to pray, Jesus puts his disciples together and he instructs them. He says, you need to pray, and pray that you won't fall into temptation. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to be praying and staying dependent on God. And then Jesus separates himself from them. I think Luke says it's a stone's throw. I hope that's at least 6 feet of social distance from them. And they don't get to be in on this conversation that Jesus has with God. And Jesus' prayer is recorded. I don't know how Luke got it, or what Jesus says, but it's this intense prayer. Even so much so that Luke says Jesus is sweating as he prays, and there's blood in his sweat, and he's in anguish. The Greek here is agonia. It looks like agony. Here's Jesus praying. Here's a son pleading with his father, saying, if there is another way, I would like it. I would like that. Could there be another way to do this? The human Jesus dreads what's coming. He knows the suffering, he knows the anguish, and he knows the separation that will be caused between him and God when he takes on the sin of the world. He's not giving up. He's not saying, I won't do it. He'll still do God's will, but if there's another possible plan. And then ultimately Jesus submits and surrenders and says, but not my will, but yours be done. And then an angel comes to attend to him. And you're reminded again that it's not just a human struggle that's happening here. If Satan is at work, God is at work. And the agents of God have been enlisted for this battle to come and care for Jesus and strengthen him. So he finishes this anguished prayer. He's hurting, he's lonely, he's afraid, and he comes back and the disciples have fallen asleep. He warned them to pray that they wouldn't fall into temptation, and they've already fallen into the temptation to just take a nap. And then as they stand there together, as they're talking together, enter the enemies. Here comes a crowd of people. There are so many crowds in the book of Luke. But the ones up to this point have been crowds of people that are interested in hearing what Jesus has to say, to support Jesus, to follow Jesus, to receive from Jesus. This is a different type of crowd. This crowd has armed guards. It has the chief priests, who are the highest level of the Jewish leadership. The high priest is there, and the elders and the temple guard are all there. And they arrive at this place led by Judas, because Judas knew where Jesus would be. Judas knew what time Jesus would be there. And so the betrayal is so poignant, so significant, that he brings them to Jesus at the place where Jesus is praying. And then to add insult to injury, the way he indicates who Jesus is to give him a greeting of a kiss. This tender greeting is a sign of rejection, as if they didn't already know which one Jesus was. So the disciples are confused. I think they start thinking, is this when we use our swords? Is this the time now, Jesus? Is this what you're talking about? And one of them grabs a sword and starts swinging. These are not men trained in battle. These are fishermen and tax collectors and, I don't know, whatever other jobs that they had before. So he grabs a sword and starts swinging and ends up lopping off the ear of one of the guards that is there. And Jesus stops it right there. This is not what I asked you to do. I will not stand for this. You're not to fight. It's not what I meant before. He's just told them that power is to serve and to come under, not to overpower others. And he's indicating to them he'll accept whatever's coming and whatever's going to happen. So he picks up the ear and he puts it back on and heals this man. It's the last miracle he performs before his death, when he heals his enemies. And then he looks at those enemies and says, really? That's not in the Greek text, but you kind of get the indication. You're coming for me like I was a criminal? I was with you all the time. Every day, you knew exactly where to find me. I've been teaching in the synagogue. You knew where to find me, and you waited. But he knows why. It's because of the secrecy. They wanted to avoid the people, to avoid the crowds, because they were afraid. And so Jesus says to them, this is your hour. Oh, I want to find this because this is good. Verse 53 of 22. But this is your hour, and the better translation, when the authority of darkness reigns. So this is your moment, he's saying to them, when you've come. But you know what this moment is? This is when the authority of darkness is taken over. He is acknowledging that there's something way bigger at work than just them. This is the work of Satan. Over and above their efforts, there is something darker at play, and they are now just pawns in the middle of this. So Jesus is taken there to the home of the high priest, who could be Annas or Caiaphas, depending on the narratives, because a person would carry the title for life. So it could be the former high priest or the current high priest. They might have even lived in the same house. And there he's questioned by the Jewish leaders. And that would have been a huge home with a courtyard in it. And that's where Peter finds himself. Peter finds his way there. He's trying to keep close to Jesus, wherever Jesus is being taken, but to also keep kind of a low profile. And he joins the servants of the household that are sitting around a fire. And over the course of a little more than an hour, 3 different people try to figure out who Peter is. Hey, what are you doing here? Who are you? And each of them connects him to Jesus. I know you. You were with him. Or you're a guy from Galilee. Or you belong with that guy. And each time, Peter denies it because he's scared. He's in close proximity now to the people that have taken Jesus. And he doesn't know what these people will do. What will the servants of the high priest do to him? And at the moment that happens, the 3rd time he says no, of course, the rooster crows. Can you imagine what that must have sounded like to Peter? Just the blaring sound of an alarm going off saying, oh my goodness, what have I done? Look at what happened. And Luke said the rooster crowed and Jesus looked right at him. I don't know how that was possible. He wasn't standing by the fire out in the courtyard. But whatever it meant, that he was passing by, that he was somewhere, he was able to look. And I wonder, what did that look mean? And how would Peter have interpreted it? If he saw Jesus look at him, and if Jesus was pleading with him to say, Peter, it's okay. I understand. You're going to be okay. Or does Peter see that look and think, now Jesus doesn't want me. I denied Jesus. I'm out. And Peter runs out behind the wall and in devastation and shame, all by himself and confused. He weeps. He just sobs outside by himself. So from there, Luke jumps. He just goes from the Peter store. Then the next thing you know, the guards are there. And the guards, these guards exemplify the kind of power that Jesus was not about. They beat him. They mock him. They challenge him. They insult him. They all work together. It's just this mob of men who bring out the worst in each other. They just one-up each other in being horrible. And then the morning comes, and apparently nobody sleeps. The leaders, this group that's meeting together called the Sanhedrin, they bring in Jesus for questioning. The commentator said for a number of reasons the proceedings are likely out of step with what would have been prescribed, what would have been allowed. They're breaking their own law, but they're in a hurry and they're seizing their moment to get this guy. So they've been looking for a way to prove that Jesus has broken Jewish law. And then they also need a reason to say that he has broken Roman law so that they can bring him before the Romans. So the question is, are you the Messiah? If they ask him this, if he says yes, they can get him on both charges. If he says yes, they'll say, that's breaking Jewish law. That is blasphemy. No one can say that about themselves. And if he says yes, he's breaking Roman law because it looks like he's an upstart, an upriser. He looks like he's someone saying, I'm a king, I'm a ruler, and he would be in opposition to the Caesar then at the time. But Jesus gives a Jesus non-answer, and he says, if I tell you, you won't believe me. I get to see them scratching their heads like, is that enough? Was that clear enough? Did he say what we need him to say? But Jesus continues and says this phrase, from now on the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. Jesus throws it out to them. There are three claims here, basically, as he says this. He's calling himself the Son of Man. It's a figure that's alluded to in Daniel, but three things. Basically, he's saying, I'm the one that's going to be seated on the right hand of God. And he's alluding to his own resurrection. It's saying, I have authority from God, and that I have authority over you, is pretty much what he says. And so then they say, are you the Son of God? And Jesus replies, you are right in saying that I am. Or you say that I am. It's kind of a sassy answer, and he says basically yes without saying yes. And now they know, we got him. This is it. We've got Jesus where we want him. You said the thing that we needed you to say. We can prove that you broke Jewish law and Roman law. So we're going to pause here and then move into chapter 23 in the next video. But when we read a narrative like this, sometimes we just read it and we think, oh, we just know the story and now we move on. And what I'm going to encourage us to do this week, in this Holy Week, is to look for ourselves in the story. There's always that opportunity in a narrative to wonder, where am I in this story? And so I invite you to think about that, to spend some time. I'm going to make a couple suggestions of things to think about this week, especially as you move toward Monday, Thursday, and Friday, and reflection about where you're at, where your heart is at, where you are with Jesus. And I'll just say this, there's always a place in the crowd. You can always read through the text and say, you know what, I'm a person in the crowd. I'm still a little far back. I'm just curious, trying to figure out who Jesus is before I make any decisions. There's always room in the crowd. But maybe you would say, if you look at this narrative, I'm one of those disciples. That's where I want to be, in that inner circle with Jesus. I need to get close enough to Jesus that I could put my head right next to his heart and be fed. Is that where you find yourself in this story? Maybe Judas. I mean, none of us wants to relate to Judas, but have you found yourself so disappointed or impatient with how God has responded to your prayers? Maybe it feels like you've been left alone. You want to get the ball rolling. It's just things aren't the way that you thought they would be, and you feel like you're on your own. And maybe you just feel like you're ready to jump ship or give up on Jesus, like Judas. Maybe you're one of those disciples arguing around the table. You want your rightful place. And maybe you find yourself saying things like this, I'm always doing the right things. I should have a better place. I should have a better place at the table. People should hear what I have to say. I want to be recognized for what I'm doing. Maybe you feel like Peter. somebody asks you, hey, do you know Jesus? Are you a Christian? Are you one of those followers of Jesus? And all of a sudden you find yourself all tongue-tied. Or just flat out denying him, no, I'm not one of them. And for that reason, or maybe some other reason, you are out behind the wall, hiding, ashamed, broken, and alone. Or maybe you find yourself like Jesus in prayer. We never get to, I don't think we really ever say that. Find yourself in the story, but you can't find yourself as Jesus. And I'm not saying to be Jesus. But are you in a place where you could sit down and pray in anguish, pray in agony, pray with whatever difficulty it takes, and be willing to say to God, your will be done. Not mine, Lord, but your will be done. Maybe you find yourself in one of these places, or you're just yourself reading a story and trying to make it through life, make it through this time, this weird season that we're in. Whatever it is, I pray that Jesus would give you an indication of how he sees you, how he loves you, how each and every one of these people had an opportunity to be welcomed back home, to be held close to his heart, and to experience all that Jesus came to give. Thanks for listening.